Bem-vindos a essa edição do TEDxFAAPLive 2022 com o tema Nova Era. Eu sou Ana Júlia Ribeiro e é uma honra estar aqui nessa tarde de segunda-feira para mostrar para vocês 9 talks inéditos que aconteceram na última edição do TED nos Estados Unidos, dos dias 10 a 14 de abril. Essa edição do TEDxFAAPLive é uma edição especial que tem a curadoria do professor Vitor Dias Greenberg, que é coordenador da pós-graduação aqui da FAAP. Eu espero que vocês gostem do conteúdo da tarde de hoje, onde profissionais renomados no mundo todo vão debater temas sobre coragem, audácia, tecnologia, inovação, inteligência e, claro, o que a gente pode esperar da nova era. Esse evento do TEDxFAAPLive, estamos na nossa terceira edição, e para você entender melhor sobre como funciona toda essa dinâmica, o TED Oficial preparou um vídeo que a gente vai assistir agora. Roda aí.
We go to the theater because we seek connection. With our pulses speeding up and slowing down in unison, our heartbeats literally sync up in the theater.
Thank you. Fantástico, né, gente? Essa edição do TEDxFAAPLive 2022 não poderia começar de maneira melhor se não recebendo aqui ela, que é atriz, produtora, cineasta premiadíssima de vários filmes que eu tenho certeza que você aí que está nos assistindo já conferiu nas grandes telas dos nossos cinemas. Bryce Dallas Howard, ela que produziu uma série, várias, na verdade, para o Disney Plus, Star Wars, a primeira e a segunda temporada. Ela também que atuou no Jurassic Park 1, 2 e 3. E ela preparou um talk maravilhoso que emocionou toda a plateia americana e que eu tenho certeza que vai abrilhantar a sua segunda-feira. Roda aí.
Hello, hello. In 2016, I filmed an episode of Black Mirror called Nosedive. It was about a woman named Lacey who lives in a futuristic world where everyone rates your social interactions. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, little spoiler, I basically have a nervous breakdown trying really hard to get liked. For many, the episode felt a little too familiar. Until recently, only a small fraction of the human population lived their lives publicly. And while we haven't entered the Black Mirror world yet, we've entered a new era. Everyone has access to a global audience. We all live in public. Some more willingly than others. There's pressure to share more of ourselves than we want. We often feel we have no other choice. To be relevant, to fit in, to get ahead, to be trusted and liked, accepted and understood. This new compulsion toward self-exposure is possibly the biggest social experiment in history. We're making life-altering decisions about our personal boundaries with no guidance and no precedent. Fortunately, there is a blueprint. Anyone who's lived in the public eye as an athlete, a politician, or an entertainer has navigated a version of this. My dad has been a public figure since he was 5 years old, as an actor, a child actor, and later as a director. And I've been an actor since my early 20s. In fact, my family has been in the business of entertainment for 3 generations. contending with how to handle putting ourselves out there for the last 70 years. My mom, Cheryl, never wanted to be in the public eye. She just happened to love a man who is. My mom met my dad wrong when they were 16, and by that point, she had flown solo in an airplane, joined an all-boys gun club, gotten in tons of fistfights, and helped her single dad raise her younger sisters. This is to say, my mom was a passionate, busy young person who initially ignored the attention of the famous boy in her high school. It was the early 70s, and my dad was known for playing Opie in the Andy Griffith Show, and he'd soon film a pilot for a new show called Happy Days. Much of this was lost on my mom. The only thing she watched on TV was Star Trek. It's true. After they finally joined forces, after he actually proposed 3 times and had kids, my mom transformed into a full-on warrior woman ready to protect. But it wasn't until I was given a movie script at preschool as a way to get it to my dad that my mom realized his visibility was extending to the entire family, and that she would need to prepare us for something she herself had never experienced: growing up in the public eye. And this entailed some extreme parenting tactics. First, no coddling, like ever. As a kid, I was terrified of snakes. So my mom got me a pet snake. When I blanked at my first piano recital and ran off stage crying, my mom insisted I stay and support my peers. Years later, when my son grimaced at a chipmunk carcass our cat had left in the driveway, Cheryl made him clean up the remains. My mom wanted to toughen us up so we'd have more courage and less fear when dealing with uncomfortable situations. So that meant zero coddling. Put your comfort away, she'd preach. Any challenge that arose was an opportunity to find your sea legs. Next up, confidence comes from character, not our looks. Cheryl was a giant buzzkill. When she noticed me glancing in the mirror as a kid, she decided to nip that in the bud immediately by covering up all the mirrors in the house. A loving compliment was, "You have wonderful character," not "you are beautiful." Oh, and character was built by doing chores. When I wasn't mucking out the goat barn, I was shearing sheep, changing tires, scrubbing toilets, volunteering, shoveling snow. Cheryl believed that hard work, particularly in service of others, breeds confidence, a trait we need more and more of when exposing ourselves to any kind of public attention. But perhaps the most important lesson was, a private life makes a public life worth living. Cheryl saw that while fame came with many blessings, Cheryl saw that while fame came with many blessings, there was an impact and a potential cost to living your life in public. And so more than anything, she, like my grandparents before her, emphasized the value of privacy. Because cultivating a private life is precious. It's sacred. Its value is inherent in what you don't share, what you withhold, and for whom. The world is now one big, small town. But within that virtual town square, there are tiers of relationships, degrees of intimacy, and everyone deserves a different amount of you. a different side. Now, where those boundaries lie is up to you. But in order to make those decisions, we must all be our own Cheryl, our own protectors. Because it's tempting to think that the more I share, the more ways you have to connect with me. But there's a specialness in knowing that whatever I share with my husband or my kids or my best friend is just for them and no one else. Without that inner circle, we're left with shallowness and a void. We're known, but never truly known, even to ourselves. Living in public asks us to be brave and bold, but preserving a private life empowers us to take those chances. So, when my 15-year-old son started a YouTube channel, and my 10-year-old daughter asked to join TikTok, I asked myself, what would Cheryl do? As much as I want to protect my kids, I know encouraging them to opt out is not the answer. I don't want my kids in the digital fray until they know who they are. But you develop who you are. I love you all. Yes, where am I, you know? Okay, here we go. Yeah, thank you so much. So I don't want my kids in the digital fray until they know who they are. But you develop your sense of self by participating in the world. So I try to help them discover themselves through these technologies, not despite them. And I give myself that same protection and motherly advice by honoring two main principles. The 2-day delay. So whatever I'm experiencing, I try to wait 48 hours before posting and sharing. Because that way I can be present in private with the people I love before calculating how I'm going to publicly position it. And post with purpose. Before I share, I ask myself why. What's the purpose? And most importantly, how does it serve the people I love? The dangers and opportunities of living a life in public existed, honestly, way longer before any of this. But it's important to know what my family knew then and knows now, that your true value is measured by the richness of your private life, the piece of you that only a select few, or perhaps only you, has access to. Because the legacy we create in private is as powerful and lasting as any public accolade, perhaps even more so. Thank you so much. Oh, you're so sweet.
Bryce Dallas Howard abrilhantando esse primeiro talk do nosso TEDxFAAPLive 2022 com o tema Nova Era. E para a gente continuar o nosso programa de hoje, a gente também precisa lembrar que falar de inovação é extremamente importante. Pensando nesse assunto, nós escolhemos aqui uma referência que é a Tiffany Ashley Bell. Ela é fundadora da organização sem fins lucrativos da The Human Utility, que é uma entidade voltada para conectar doadores que querem ajudar a pagar contas de água de pessoas que não têm condição. Esse movimento começou em Detroit, nos Estados Unidos, através dessa ONG, e também ela conseguiu ampliar todo esse movimento para cidades como Maryland, Michigan, Pensilvânia e também na Flórida. Vamos ver ela apresentando essa ideia? Com vocês, Tiffany Ashley Bell no TEDxFAAPLive.
Hello. How's everybody? It's good. So, one Thursday morning several summers ago, I woke up and started scrolling through social media like so many of us do every morning. But what caught my eye that morning, though, was an article about how 100,000 people in Detroit were about to have to live without running water because they couldn't afford their water bills. And people have been living with this issue for a while. And to get by, they were doing everything from collecting rainwater in barrels to walking to relatives' houses to take showers every few days. And much worse, sometime later, I learned that a lot of people were actually losing custody of their kids because they couldn't afford to pay their water bills. And instead of someone helping them, they just lost their kids. For many of them, their greatest transgression, you could argue, was that they were either elderly, disabled, had just been laid off, or worked jobs that simply didn't pay enough. And yes, I said jobs. And to me, how they were being treated and the level of contempt shown to them and how easy it was to simply deny them something that we all need to live was disgusting. It's disgusting. But to me, this also felt personal, even though I have no direct family ties to Detroit. And here's why. Many of the people who were facing shutoffs were black. Many were also, like myself, black women. And Lord knows it's not the first time in the United States that black people have been denied basic human rights, like water. So to me, that created an overwhelming urge to do something, to help. I mean, I couldn't just read that and then go on about my day. But then it became a question of what can I, sitting in my pajamas as one person at home, actually do? Well, what? But wait, I'm a programmer and a heavy social media user. So I decided to tweet what I was reading about, what I was seeing, how I felt, to my online community of activists, politicians, startup founders and investors, some like yourselves, and other programmers, of course. And over the course of a few hours of back and forth about what to do, we resolved to do the simplest, most obvious thing that would help somebody in this situation. We decided to pay some water bills. And to do that, thank you. To do that, I skipped work that day. I did not go to work that day. And instead, I spent a few hours digging around on the water company's website. And I found something interesting that sort of jump-started what to do for people. For some reason, there was a 400-page PDF of customers on the website that the water company couldn't deliver their bills to through the mail. And some of these were delinquent accounts. But one of the things that was interesting about this list is that it also included account numbers for people. So you could just take one of those account numbers and at that time plug it into the website and see everything about that account. So I did that. And one of the things that was interesting, though, there was that I saw a make a payment button. So the idea then became, what if we got the account numbers of people that needed help and then made payments for them? So a few hours later, I built a website to find those people and start connecting them to people that needed help. And then I tweeted that. And to keep things simple, people who wanted to help simply would get instructions on how to log onto the utility's website as if they were the account holder and just make payments. And then once they had done that, they would send us the receipts, and we would send those to the families that had gotten the help. And empowered with those donations, with those payments, they were able to go to the water company and advocate for themselves and demand that their water be turned back on. And in doing that, that's how, in the first 40 or so days of doing this, we paid over $100,000 in water bills by just simply, thank you. By just simply sending people directly to the utility company's website to pay $5, $10, whatever they could afford. And I don't say that to brag, but instead to encourage you all to notice problems and to think about what is the simplest, most obvious thing you can do to impact that problem. So first, what I'll also say that was true for us is that it should be abundantly clear that whatever you do doesn't actually have to be perfect. You don't have to do some big overarching thing like a nonprofit, because you won't have all the answers when you start. But what's beautiful about that is that you don't actually need to have all the answers to get started. And I will confess that if we had had all the answers, if we had known too much, we might have actually gotten started. So the next thing that's true is that when you put together and you start doing something that's imperfect, unfinished, it's not finished, people will see what you're doing and they'll want to join you. They'll want to get together with you to make what you're doing bigger, more impactful, more meaningful, but all in ways unique to themselves. For us, that was the city employees who answered our emails on weekends, and then during the week drove people to appointments to get their water turned back on. It was the people in mutual aid groups and nonprofits that partnered with us to completely pay off the water bills for some families. It was the people who actually really made this work possible by giving $5, $10, $20, some of whom had been in this situation themselves a few years prior, where they couldn't afford their own bills, but they now could, so they were generous about it. It was the people who held bake sales to help people that they didn't know and would never meet. People will see you walking the walk, and they'll understand that compassion is contagious. So I'd ask you in this moment then, what is it that sends you down a rabbit hole of blog posts and news articles? What leaves you so disgusted and annoyed that you would rather skip work or class and work on that instead? What is that for you? It's got to be something. So suppose, for example, you find out that the third graders at your old elementary school owe lunch money debt. What if the most obvious thing to do for them is to pay off that lunch money debt, sponsor some lunches, and then later on, go run for the local school board to push for systemic change around access to nutrition at school? That's just an idea. Now, you might hear this and say, that's nice, that's cute, but I don't really have time for that. Or, most problems are too big to work on, so why bother? I'll say you're not unique in thinking that at all. But if we just stick with the idea of doing the smallest at first, the most obvious thing, and just think about for a second, what do you have the time? What do you have the resources? What do you have the skills and the influence even to do, to make happen? For me, I was a programmer with a whole day job, so I didn't actually initially have time to work on this all day either. But using the skills and the resources and the network that I did have, we built out the original website and then grew it from there. So the next somewhat obvious, but I think hasty criticism that we sometimes hear is that what we did was just a Band-Aid. That whatever you end up doing is not going to be significant enough. It's not going to make a difference. It's too fleeting of a thing to try to do to make a difference. But is it not that the purpose of a Band-Aid is to give an injury, a place where something has gone wrong, the opportunity to heal? And I'll say no. Initially, we weren't going to solve the root of why people couldn't afford their water bills. And I'm not here to tell you either that benevolent strangers sitting at home in their pajamas are a proper substitute for systemic structural changes to issues. But what I will tell you, though, is that our solution didn't attack the poverty, it didn't attack the unemployment, it didn't attack the bad public policy, yes, bad public policy, that enthusiastically punishes people who are poor, especially when they are black or brown. But what we did give people, what we did give people in that moment is relief. So again, whatever you do, if it's small and if it's an obvious thing, it doesn't mean that your impact can't actually be durable. And that you shouldn't try to do something. And I say that because today, we have helped over 5,000 people with over $1 million in water bill payments just from, thank you. Just from people, again, giving $5, $10, $50, whatever they can afford to contribute. And our ripples of compassion have actually gone even further. We got a major American city to start offering more compassionate assistance. We had a US member of Congress in their office reach out to get help for their constituents. We've had policymakers in 3 different states that we were able to help using our data, our knowledge, our experience to understand what's happening around water affordability in their districts. We've also been able to partner with other nonprofits and mutual aid groups to keep families from facing eviction and homelessness over their water bills. We've also been able to help families avoid facing the threat of losing their kids. I also now do this work full-time with the goal of helping utilities understand how to make water more affordable, make water more of a human right, so that people also don't fall behind on their bills in the first place. Legendary comedian Lily Tomlin once said, "I always wondered why people wouldn't do something about that. Why somebody wouldn't do something about that." Then I realized I was somebody. So you don't even actually have to be a programmer to make a difference, or even do what I did. You just have to be, like Lily said, to be somebody who sees a thing that can be fixed, can be impacted, and do that. Do something. Thank you.
É uma belíssima iniciativa, né, gente? E aí, vocês estão gostando dessa edição do TEDxFAAPLive 2022? Nós aqui, a nossa equipe técnica, esperamos que sim, que a gente preparou tudo isso com muito carinho para alegrar essa sua tarde de segunda-feira. Para a gente dar continuidade aos nossos talks de hoje, eu vou chamar aqui ninguém mais, ninguém menos do que Bill Gates, gente. Eu nunca imaginei que eu fosse chamar esse nome aqui na minha vida. Muito obrigada, professor Vitor Dias Greenberg, por possibilitar momentos icônicos na história desse TEDxFAAPLive. A gente vai chamar aqui o Bill Gates, ele que é fundador da Microsoft. Em 2015, ele inclusive ele participou do TED. E ele, gente, previu a pandemia. Então, assim, a gente tem que prestar muita atenção no que o Bill Gates diz pra gente, porque essas coisas acontecem. E agora ele está preparando, inclusive, um livro novo, elencando tudo o que a gente pode ter aprendido com a pandemia, pra gente não esquecer jamais. O título do livro, eu tenho aqui agora? Eu não tenho, gente, mas o título do livro é bem interessante. Eu acho que vocês podem buscar aí, dar um Google, que vai valer a pena. Vamos lá? Podemos chamar o Bill Gates? Então roda Bill Gates no TEDxFAAPLive.
In the year 6 CE, a fire devastated Rome. In response, Emperor Augustus did something that had never been done before in the history of the empire. He created a permanent team of firefighters who used buckets, just like this one. Augustus understood that individuals alone can't protect themselves from fires. They need help from the community. When one person's house is on fire, that creates a risk for everyone else's homes. And so what we've had these last few years is like a horrific global fire. The COVID pandemic has killed millions and upended economies. And we want to stop that from happening again. COVID, it's hard to overstate how awful it's been. It's increased the health inequities between the rich and the poor. Your survival depended partly on your income, your race, the neighborhood you lived in. And so we should seize this opportunity to create a world where everyone has a chance to live a healthy and productive life. Also, a life free from the fear of the next COVID-19. When I was on the stage in 2015, I was one of many people who said we weren't ready and we needed to get ready. We didn't. The speech actually was watched by a lot of people, but 90% of the views were after it was too late. So now I hope the need is clear, and of course we've learned a lot. During this pandemic, a lot of things worked well, a lot of things didn't work well. And so we have all that knowledge to build a prevention system. COVID-19 can be the last pandemic if we take the right steps. So how? What are these steps? Well, let's go back and look at what the Romans did. Think about how over time we've gotten good at preventing big fires. Fire prevention is kind of this pervasive thing. It's well-funded, it's well understood. If an alarm went off right now, everyone here would know we're supposed to calmly gather, go out and wait instructions. We'd know that help would be on the way because we have lots of trained firefighters who practice. The United States alone has 370,000 full-time firefighters, even more than I guessed that number would be. We also have access to water. The United States, for example, has almost 9 million fire hydrants. And so that type of investment, that type of practice, that type of system is what we need to stop pandemics. Now, often in movies we'll have pandemics, and I'm always impressed with what takes place. Let's look at an example of this rapid response. Well, that's quite impressive. We don't need the music, but otherwise, we saw exactly what should happen. An outbreak's detected very quickly, literally within days. Doctors are dispatched. They have a helicopter to get into exactly ground zero. They go in there and they've got the right tools. And this is what should happen when an outbreak is spotted. But we don't have that team. We don't have those resources. And if an outbreak took place in a low-income country, it could be literally months before we started to orchestrate those resources. So despite what you see in movies, there is no group of experts standing by to prevent this disaster. So we have to create a new team. I believe we should create what I call the GERM team. GERM stands for Global Epidemic Response and Mobilization. And this group is full-time. Their only priority is pandemic prevention. It's made up of a diverse set of specialists with a lot of different realms of expertise: epidemiologists, data scientists, logistics experts. And it's not just scientific and medical knowledge. They also have to have communication and diplomacy skills. The cost of this team is significant. It's over $1 billion a year to support the 3,000 people who would be on this team. And its mission is to stop outbreaks before they become pandemics. The work would be coordinated by the WHO. They'd be present in many locations around the world, stationed in public health agencies. They'd work closely with the national teams, depending on the income level. They'd have more in the lower income countries. For example, we could have GERM members, say an epidemiologist, working out of the Africa CDC office in Abuja. And a very important thing is that, like firefighters, GERM team would do drills. When you want to have quick response, when you want to make sure you have all the pieces there and you can move very quickly, practice is key. That's how you make sure everyone knows what to do. Now, this team, there could be periods where there's no risky outbreak, and they can keep their skills strong by working on some of the other infectious diseases, but that would be a second priority. They would work with countries to strengthen their health systems. The health systems are the front line. You need to know if, say, a lot of people show up with a new kind of cough, that's when Germany needs to look into it and say, is this an outbreak? Is there a new pathogen here? What is the sequence of that? And so for all of this, the first 100 days are key. Viruses spread exponentially. And so if you get in there when the infection rate is fairly small, you can actually stop the spread. You know, in this epidemic, if we'd been able to stop it within 100 days, we would have saved over 98% of the lives. Now, we did have countries that did a good job. Australia is an example. They orchestrated diagnostic capacity. They came up with distancing policies and quarantine policies. And so their overall death rate per capita will be well less than a tenth of other countries. But we did not, as a world, contain it. And that's what we have to do next time. When COVID struck, we were almost like Rome before they had fire buckets and firefighters. We didn't have the people, the systems, or the tools we need. Now, with the right investments, we can have a whole new generation of tools, better diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. A good example in the diagnostic area is this little machine. This is called the Lumira. We can have these all over the world. It can test for any number of diseases. It's a tenth as expensive as PCR. It's absolutely as accurate, and it's simple, so it can be used anywhere. We need other R&D investments. One that I'm very excited about is the idea of a drug that you inhale that blocks you from getting infected. It can be pathogen independent and trigger your immune system so that you'll be protected. A lot of the tools, the diagnostic tools and those infection blocking tools are important because they can be staged in advance. Now, we also need vaccines, but we want to stop the outbreak before we have to do a global vaccination campaign. And so vaccines can play a couple of different roles, but not the primary role. We have to invest in more than just that. When we look at vaccines, they were the miracle of this epidemic. They saved millions of lives, but they can be far better. We need to invent easier to deliver vaccines that are just a patch you put on your arm or something that you inhale. We need vaccines that actually block infections. In this case, there were lots of breakthrough infections. We need vaccines that are broad spectrum, so they work against most of the emerging variants, which we did not have this time. And we also need factories that are standing by so we can build enough vaccines for the entire world within 6 months and achieve far better equity. The vaccines can also do something that would be super helpful, which is to help us eradicate entire families of viruses. Innovative new vaccines used properly could get rid of the flu family, the coronavirus family. And there's a huge burden of those, even in non-pandemic years. And if we get rid of it, it can never cause a pandemic. So I'm talking about investments in 3 broad areas. The disease monitoring, that's germ. The R&D tools that are far better. And finally, and the most expensive, is improved health systems. This won't be cheap, but it'll save lives, and even it'll save money in the long run. It's like an insurance policy. The cost to prevent the next pandemic will be tens of billions of dollars. But let's compare that to what we just went through. The IMF estimates that COVID has cost nearly $14 trillion. And so we need to spend billions in order to save trillions. And here's the best part of this. Even when we're not having an outbreak, these investments, like the Lemira, those new vaccines, they will make people healthier. They'll shrink the gap, the health equity gap, which is gigantic, between rich and poor countries. For example, we can detect more HIV cases and do a better job of treatment. We can reduce deaths from malaria. We can get more people high-quality care. And so this is not just a downer about how to stop things from getting worse, but also a chance to make things better. If we take the right steps, we can make COVID-19 the last pandemic, and we can build a healthier, more equitable world for everyone. Thank you.
Bill Gates no TEDxFAAPLive 2022. E para você que ficou curioso com o nome do livro que Bill Gates vai escrever, vai lançar em breve, é How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. Todos os ensinamentos que foram aprendidos ao longo da pandemia, ele fez uma curadoria perfeita e vai falar pra gente o que a gente, enfim, não pode esquecer pra gente se prevenir para a próxima pandemia. Espero que não aconteça, né? Nessa nova era, acho que a gente pode esperar coisas melhores. Será? Vamos ver quais são as previsões desse nosso próximo convidado que vem por aí. É um nome super conhecido para quem faz parte do mercado audiovisual. E você com certeza, quem aí não faz parte do mercado audiovisual, com certeza você já se deparou com o trabalho dele. Vou dar um spoiler. The Office. Já assistiu? Sim, o roteirista e produtor Michael Schur está marcando presença aqui no TEDxFAAP dessa edição. Ele também estreou no seu primeiro trabalho na TV com o Saturday Night Live, que é um programa famosíssimo nos Estados Unidos. Gostou um pouquinho de saber mais do trabalho dele? Então acho que o nosso novo talk pode te interessar bastante. Roda aí Michael Schur no TEDxFAAPLive. Vocês acabaram de se deparar com Particle Inc., que é um coletivo de artistas gráficos, designers digitais. A gente teve um pequeno probleminha técnico e agora sim a gente vai conseguir conferir o Michael Score. Eu espero que vocês tenham gostado do nosso spoiler do Particle Inc., que é esse coletivo que mistura tecnologia, design e muitos sonhos. Agora vamos conferir o Michael Score. Roda aí.
I am also 17 years old. So you should find me just as impressive. You get it, okay. Yeah, you get it. I have been a television comedy writer for almost 25 years. I have written sketches and animated shows and sitcoms, but for the last decade, my real passion has been the study of ethics. It's a classic cautionary tale, right? You move to Hollywood, you get seduced by the bright lights and the fast cars, and before you know it, you're reading 18th century German philosophy. But that's not the reason I became interested in ethics. I've always been an intense rule follower. When I was in kindergarten, our teacher would tell everyone to line up, and I would immediately line up, and then I would look at all the other kids who were still goofing off, and I would think, what are they doing? Did they not hear her? She said to line up. I rinse my mouth with mouthwash for at least 30 seconds every night because on the label, it says, use for 30 seconds. I know, I'm irritated by me too. But the real reason that I became interested in ethics is because in 2005, I royally and epically screwed something up. So, 2005, my wife, JJ, driving along in slow-moving traffic, bumps into the guy in front of her. Police officer looks everything over, doesn't see any damage, they exchange numbers, and they go on their way. A couple days later, we get a notice that the guy wants $836 because, according to him, the entire fender needs to be replaced. This is happening during Hurricane Katrina. JJ and I had just been to New Orleans on a trip. We had really fallen in love with this beautiful city, which was now literally underwater. I was very riled up. This was hitting me really hard. So I went and I looked at the guy's car, and if I got very close and I strained my eyes, I could just barely see this little line on the crease. It looked like the mark you make with a pencil on the wall when you're trying to hang a picture. And I told the guy, essentially, that he shouldn't care about this. I told him that things like this were why car insurance rates in LA were so expensive. I told him that cars get little dings and dents all the time, and he was stupid to care about that. I told him that there were more important things in life than this, like Hurricane Katrina. And then I made him an offer. I said that I would donate $836 to the Red Cross Katrina Relief Fund in his name if he agreed not to file this claim and fix his car. He said he would think it over. So I went back to work, and as very confident people are wont to do, I started telling all my friends about how awesome I was being. And then they jumped in and started pledging more and more money if this guy would agree not to fix his car. So suddenly it was $2,000, then it was $5,000. In like a day and a half, I had pledges from hundreds of people all across the country of more than $25,000 if this guy would agree not to file an insurance claim and fix his car. And by the way, he has no idea this is happening. He is completely in the dark. I started a blog where I gave people hourly updates. Yeah, it's beginning to dawn on you what a bad idea this is, right? I started a blog, gave people updates. I got media inquiries from news programs, from NPR. I had a dream of rescuing New Orleans by myself with nothing more than my computer and a fire hose of self-righteous anger. And then I started to feel sick to my stomach. And so did JJ at the exact same moment. We both were suddenly overcome with this awful feeling that there was something very bad and wrong about what we were doing, but we could not pinpoint what it was. I just remember thinking, all right, I don't care about cars getting little dings and dents, but this guy does. Is that wrong somehow? I don't think that's wrong. And also, is this little tiny negotiation that we're in really worth all of this fury and rage and shame that I'm whipping up and sending in his direction? I don't think it is. So I did what any rational person would do in this situation. I started crying and I hid under my bed. And then I started reading philosophy. And I started calling philosophy professors and asking them to talk this out with me. And in the process, yeah, and they all, by the way, did it, because philosophy professors love talking about philosophy. The drop of a hat, they will all talk about philosophy with you. So in the process, I learned all of these incredibly wonderful theories that the smartest people who have ever lived have developed over the last 2,500 years that help us make better decisions and become better people. For example, I learned about Immanuel Kant and the categorical imperative. So Kant says when we're about to do something, we have to design a rule or a maxim that we could will to be universal, meaning we have to imagine what if everyone did what we're about to do, what would happen to the world? Would it be okay or would it get all screwed up? So the maxim I'm designing here is something like anytime two people are in any kind of negotiation, one of them can drag into the negotiation an entirely unrelated global calamity and tell the other person that they shouldn't care about whatever they care about because they should care about that instead. That world would suck, right? Like, your sister borrows $5 from you, you ask for it back, she says, how dare you care about $5 when the polar ice caps are melting? No one wants to live in this world, right? Kant also says, by the way, that you should treat people as ends in themselves and not a means to an end, meaning you shouldn't use people to get what you want. Well, guess what I was doing? I also learned about Aristotle and the study of virtue ethics. So Aristotle says there's certain qualities we should all have, things like generosity and courage and friendliness and mildness, and he wants us to practice them every day so that we not only have them, we have them in the exact right amount. We don't have a deficiency of them, and we don't have an excess of them. Now, virtue ethics can be kind of maddeningly imprecise, but at the very least, it was pretty clear that I was exhibiting an excess of anger and maybe a deficiency of friendliness. I wasn't nailing it, is the point. Like, I definitely was not getting it exactly right. Then I learned about utilitarianism, made famous by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. And this one actually gave me a shred of hope that I was doing something good, because utilitarians only care about the results of our actions. They only care that we are creating more happiness and pleasure than we are pain and suffering. So yes, I'm being obnoxious and moralistic and high-handed to this guy, causing him some amount of pain, but an enormous amount of money is going to be given to people in great need. So the amount of happiness I'm creating outweighs the amount of pain and suffering. But the utilitarians also said that when we're calculating the amount of happiness or pain we've created, we can't just think about the one person we're dealing with. We have to think about the fact that everybody in our society will now both know this happened and will fear that it could someday happen to them. And since we've already seen what a terrible, stinky world I was trying to create, everyone in our society would become a little bit bummed out and sad by what I did. And so the total amount of pain and suffering I've created might actually outweigh the happiness. I never got a straightforward answer, obviously, because Aristotle never wrote about, like, fender benders involving horse-drawn carriages in ancient Athens. But at the very least, it sure felt like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill would be a little disappointed in me. And it sure felt like Aristotle would be a little annoyed. And it sure felt like Immanuel Kant would wave a disapproving finger at me. And if all of the world's greatest philosophers are on one side of a debate, and you are on the other side, you fucked up. Okay. Actually, wait, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say that. If all of the world's greatest philosophers are on one side of a debate, and you are on the other side, you messed up. Okay. So, I called the guy. I apologized profusely. I told him the entire story. He was very kind and forgiving, which was an enormous relief to me. I told him I had already cut him a check, which was in the mail. I went back to the blog. I told everybody the outcome. Most people, not all, but most of them thought it was a pretty happy outcome. I encourage them to give money to the Red Cross anyway, because giving money to hurricane victims is a nice thing to do. And in the end, more than $25,000 was indeed donated to the Red Cross Hurricane Katrina relief efforts. Don't applaud that. That's the happy result of a bad event. So why did this embarrassing, miserable mistake that I made make me want to continue to study moral philosophy? If I told you that you were going to be on Jeopardy, how would you prepare? You would read some trivia books and flip through a world atlas. If I told you that you were going to take a half-court shot at an NBA game for the chance to win $50,000, how would you prepare? You would get a basketball, you would go to the YMCA, and you would practice hucking up half-court shots. Well, you're probably never going to be on Jeopardy. You are probably never going to take a half-court shot at an NBA game for a chance to win $50,000, but you will, I guarantee it, at some point become embroiled in a complicated, confusing, ugly, gut-wrenching moral dilemma. That is just a fact of life on Earth. There will be a dilemma in which there is no clear rule to follow. There is only a kind of vague investigation, and everything you do seems like it might be wrong. So how do you prepare for that? By reading theories of ethics and understanding what they say, what they mean, how they purport to help us make better decisions and become better people. And by the way, just reading these theories is no guarantee that you will actually make the right choice when you're inside one of these complicated and tangled ethical dilemmas. You can take all the practice half-court shots you want at the YMCA, but when you set foot on the floor of the NBA arena and there are 15,000 screaming fans, you're probably still going to throw up an air ball, right? But if you've prepared, you will increase your odds of success. You will increase the chances that you sink the shot or that you at least get the ball close enough to the rim that you don't embarrass yourself and become a meme. Understanding ethical theories is how we increase our chances of success at simply being human beings who have to negotiate with other human beings. And to me, there is nothing more important than that. Thank you.
E aí, gostaram do Michael Schur? Quero saber de vocês, se vocês também estão curtindo todos os nossos TED Talks dessa tarde, dessa segunda-feira maravilhosa. Comenta aqui na nossa transmissão, manda um recado pra gente, que a gente vai olhar com muito carinho. Nós estamos chegando ao final quase do nosso evento, temos alguns talks pela frente, e agora chegou o momento da gente conhecer uma artista que faz um trabalho muito diferente de tudo que eu já tinha visto antes desse TED rolar. O nome dela é Sophia Crespo, ela é uma artista que explora tecnologias inspiradas na biologia. Com sede em Lisboa, a Sophia Crespo é cofundadora da Entangled Other Studio. Ela trabalha para entender como é que a vida orgânica usa mecanismos artificiais para simular e evoluir. E ela constrói obras artísticas criativas a partir disso, unindo biologia, tecnologia e arte. Legal, né? Vamos conferir.
I'd like to start by asking you to imagine a color that you've never seen before. Just for a second, give this a try. Can you actually visualize a color that you've never been able to perceive? I never seem to get tired of trying this, although I know it's not an easy challenge. And the thing is, we can't visualize, we can imagine something without drawing upon our experiences. A color we haven't yet seen outside the spectrum we can perceive is outside our ability to conjure up. It's almost like there's a boundary to our imagination, where all the colors we can imagine can only be various shades of other colors we have previously seen. Yet, we know for a fact that those color frequencies outside our visible spectrum are there. And scientists believe that there are species that have many more photoreceptors than just the 3 color ones we humans have. Which, by the way, not all humans see the world in the same way. Some of us are colorblind to various degrees, and very often we don't even agree on small things, like if a dress on the internet is blue and black or white and gold. But my favorite creature, well, one of my favorite creatures, is the peacock mantis shrimp, which is estimated to have 12 to 16 photoreceptors. And that indicates the world to them might look so much more colorful. So what about artificial intelligence? Can AI help us see beyond our human capabilities? Well, I've been working with AI for the past 5 years. And in my experience, it can see within the data it gets fed. But then you might be wondering, OK, if AI can't help imagine anything new, why would an artist see any point in using it? And my answer to that is because I think that it can help augment our creativity, as there's value in creating combinations of known elements to form new ones. And this boundary of what we can imagine based on what we have experienced is the place that I have been exploring. For me, it started with jellyfish on a screen at an aquarium and wearing those old 3D glasses, which I hope you remember, the ones with the blue and red lens. And this experience made me want to recreate their textures. But not just that, I also wanted to create new jellyfish that I hadn't seen before, like these. And what started with jellyfish very quickly escalated to other sea creatures, like sea anemone, coral, and fish. And then from there came amphibians, birds, and insects. And this became a series called Neural Zoo. But when you look closely, what do you see? There's no single creature in these images. And AI augments my creative process by allowing me to distill and recombine textures. And that's something that would otherwise take me months to draw by hand. Plus, I'm actually terrible at drawing. So you could say, in a way, what I'm doing is a contemporary version of something that humans have already been doing for a long time, even before cameras existed. In medieval times, people went on expeditions, and when they came back, they would share about what they saw to an illustrator. And the illustrator, having never seen what was being described, would end up drawing based on the creatures that they had previously seen, and in the process creating like a hybrid animal of some sort. So an explorer might describe a beaver, but having never seen one, the illustrator might give it the head of a rodent, the body of a dog, and a fish-like tail. In the series Artificial Natural History, I took thousands of illustrations from natural history archives, and I fed them to a neural network to generate new versions of them. But up until now, all my work was done in 2D. And with the help of my studio partner, Felican McCormick, we decided to train a neural network on a data set of 3D scanned beetles. But I must warn you that our first results were extremely blurry, and they look like the blobs you see here. And this could be due to many reasons, but one of them being that there aren't really a lot of openly available data sets of 3D insects. And also, we were repurposing a neural network that normally gets used to generate images to generate 3D. So, believe it or not, these are very exciting blobs to us. But with time and some very hacky solutions, like data augmentation, where we threw in ants and other beetle-like insects to enhance the data set, we ended up getting this, which we've been told they look like grilled chicken. But hungry for more, we pushed our technique, and eventually they ended up looking like this. We used something called 3D style transfer to map textures onto them, and we also trained a natural language model to generate scientific-like names and anatomical descriptions. And eventually, we even found a network architecture that could handle 3D meshes, so they ended up looking like this. And for us, this became a way of creating kind of a speculative study. Thank you. A speculative study of creatures that never existed, kind of like a speculative biology. But I didn't want to talk about AI and its potential unless it brought me closer to a real species. Which of these do you think is easier to find data about online? Yeah, well, as you guessed correctly, the red panda. And this maybe could be due to many reasons, but one of them being how cute they are, which means we photograph and talk about them a lot, unlike the boreal fall lichen. But both of them are classified as endangered. So I wanted to bring visibility to other endangered species that don't get the same amount of digital representation as the cute, fluffy red panda. And to do this, we trained an AI on millions of images of the natural world, and then we prompted with text to generate some of these creatures. So when prompted with a text, an image of a critically endangered spider, the peacock tarantula, and its scientific name, our model generated this. And here's an image of the real peacock tarantula, which is a wonderful spider endemic to India. But when prompted with a text, an image of a critically endangered bird, the mangrove finch, our model generated this. And here's a photo of the real mangrove finch. Both these creatures exist in the wild, but the accuracy of each generated image is fully dependent on the data available. These chimeras of our everyday data, to me, are a different way of how the future could be. Not in a literal sense, perhaps, but in the sense that through practicing the expanding of our own imagination about the ecosystems we are a part of, we might just be better equipped to recognize new opportunities and potential. Knowing that there's a boundary to our imagination doesn't have to feel limiting. On the contrary, it can help motivate us to expand that boundary further and to seek out colors and things we haven't yet seen, and perhaps enrich our imagination as a result. So, thank you.
Acabamos de conferir Sofia Crespo aqui no TEDxFAAPLive 2022. E para a gente continuar, eu quero saber se vocês já ouviram falar do que é uma diretora de aquecimento. Já ouviram falar nesses termos? Pois é, a gente vai conhecer o trabalho da Ellen Muraville, ela que foi indicada como pessoa responsável para criar políticas sobre o aquecimento global na cidade de Atenas, na Grécia. Ela vai usar o TED dela para falar sobre isso. Afinal de contas, as cidades estão esquentando, o nosso globo terrestre está esquentando cada vez mais. E como a gente pode esfriar as nossas cidades para a gente conseguir sobreviver como humanidade um pouquinho mais do tempo esperado? Ai, conta pra gente, Ellen Muraville. Espero que vocês gostem.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be here. So in my city of Athens, Greece, like in many cities around the world, a lot of people thought that climate change is something happening far away. Until ash started falling from the sky and temperatures neared 45 degrees Celsius in the summer of 2021. And they stayed above 40 degrees for several days. The asphalt sizzled and huge wildfires burned the forests around the city, and people died. The last decade has been the hottest ever recorded in our history. Paradoxically, even though we've been talking about global warming for decades, we haven't been talking about extreme heat, especially in urban environments. Extreme heat is the deadliest of all extreme weather phenomena. Very few of us know this. We overlook extreme heat because heat doesn't come with the drama of roofs sent flying and streets turned into rivers. Heat destroys quietly. Yet there is little escape from heat. These are temperatures our bodies are not made for and cannot adapt to. These are temperatures our cities and our infrastructure is not made for. The structures of our cities and the surfaces absorb heat and store it and radiate it at night. Cars and air conditionings add more to the urban environment, and this is a deadly mix. This is what we call the urban heat island. The list of health effects from heat and from heat waves is long, and it includes significant mental problems, mental health problems. It also creates fatigue and loss of sleep, which in turn increases workplace injuries as well as significant losses of productivity. Heat waves also, we know that they increase violence in communities. We have correlated it to increased violence in communities, and also they lower the ability of children to learn. And in the cities, not everybody, of course, is affected equally. The poor, especially the energy poor and the housing poor, are most vulnerable, as well as people with pre-existing conditions, people above 60 years old, pregnant women, young children, and people that have manual labor jobs. Also, we know that heat has been baking farmers' crops, reducing yields, inhibiting pollination, and more farm workers are going to work before daybreak or farming in the night, harvesting in the night. It's just getting too darn hot. The great infrastructures that we have built with ingenuity and effort during the last 2 centuries, the dams, the waterways, the highways, the railways, they have been carefully engineered for a climate that no longer exists. What can we do? I will talk about cities because that's my territory. As Chief Heat Officer of Athens, I think of all possible efforts in 3 general categories: awareness, preparedness, and redesign. Awareness means that we recognize the threat. It's hard sometimes to persuade people, especially in hot climates, to take heat exposure seriously. So together, this year, together with the Ars Rockefeller Resilience Center, we are going to pilot for the first time this summer 4 cities in the US and Athens. We're going to pilot a new methodology for naming and categorizing heat waves like we do hurricanes. So consider this, when there is a category 4 hurricane, you don't expect a pizza delivery person to bring a pizza to your house, nor do you expect like people to keep working in a construction site. However, we don't have such considerations or policies in relation to a category 4 heat wave. Because there is no category 4 heat wave, we don't have metrics and we don't have categories. And I think that this will be a real game changer. So this is just one thing, but I think this is important. So awareness leads to preparedness. And preparedness means that you are kind of ready to basically, when the event happens, to protect the most vulnerable. And there's a whole slew of actions that cities are doing all around the world, short-term things to protect people during the heat waves. For example, in Athens, we have created a smartphone app that gives you real personalized and real-time risk assessment and gives you on a map risk assessment in relation to heat, and gives you on a map where you can go to get cover, where are the cool spaces, the nearest cool spaces. New York has created this great buddy system where people in the neighborhood keep on checking during heat waves on people that are vulnerable in the neighborhood. They also gave, I think a couple of years ago, 74,000 units of air conditioning for low-income seniors. Sydney does this great thing, which is that they divert energy from the industrial sector to residential districts to avoid blackouts during heat waves. So these are some short-term things that we can do and we've been doing. But the real task at hand is redesigning our cities to make our cities cooler and thinking beyond air conditioning. So before we started designing our buildings and our cities and cooling them and heating them with fossil fuels, architecture had incorporated centuries-long of wisdom for design solutions and materials that were fine-tuned to the local climate conditions. So thick walls with tiny openings, or well-placed windows high up in the building that kind of move air from the bottom up and out, or outside shutters, shady and verdant internal courtyards with fountains, or outside walls that are whitewashed every spring to reflect the hot summer heat, the heat of the hot summers. So compare these to our concrete steel and glass buildings that are air-conditioned and that have sealed windows that basically make our cities into heat traps, compounding instead of solving the problem. So what we really need to do is we need to radically rethink and redesign our urban environments away from the logic of modernity, away from the logic of carbon modernity. Carbon is there from the get-go, from the materials that we use, for the types of construction, from the way we use the buildings, we heat and cool them, the way we eat, the way we consume, the way we move around in our urban environments. So we need to redesign our cities beyond energy efficiency and cutting carbon emissions. We need an urban design revolution, a total paradigm shift that probably needs to be led not by architects anymore, but landscape architects that know more about thermodynamics and soil and the importance of soils for biodiversity and all these things that can really bring about a real paradigm shift, a revolution in design, a new type of urbanity that actually is a different metabolic animal. Our cities of the future will be different metabolic systems. And we don't really know yet what this is going to look like, but I think it's going to be great. And it's just the beginning. But what we do know is that we really, really urgently need to build resilience to our current climate conditions at urban scale. There are materials and technologies that are currently being developed that will help, but the main thing, the first and foremost and most important thing for bringing down heat in cities is bringing nature into the urban fabric. And this means a radical increase of trees, of tree coverage, of biodiversity, and of water in the surfaces of our cities so that we can bring down the heat. So this is the time, this is the decade, as Mr. Gore said before, that we have to do these things. We have to build heat resilience. And this means that cities have to really think the interconnections and interdependencies between different urban systems, and they have to think of resources very carefully and build backup systems and redundancies and flexibility and diversity, and think about sustainability and equity, because this is how we build resilience in our cities. And cities are already doing it, and they're changing, and we're very much learning from each other, because for the first time, the last few decades, cities belong in powerful urban networks. So we're kind of talking with each other and learning from each other. Networks like Resilient Cities Network and C40 are really supporting cities. And I'm going to finish by giving you a few examples of what cities have done. And of course, I'm going to start from Athens. So in Athens, we have this incredible Roman aqueduct, a brilliant, ancient masterpiece of design and engineering that runs for 20 kilometers underground, totally invisible, and still today moves enormous amounts of water from the hills outside of Athens to the center of Athens. The water is great, too. It's perfect for irrigation. You don't need to do anything to it. And for decades now, we've been just throwing it into the sewage and then to the sea. So now this urban aqueduct this ancient monument is going to be used to build resilience and lower heat by supporting urban nature for the modern city of Athens. Another great example is Medellin in Colombia. Medellin, they created 36 green corridors, a dense network of trees and flower beds that has lowered temperatures 4 degrees Celsius in the city, and it does a lot of other things, ecosystemic services like captures pollution and noise pollution and water and soil erosion. So all these things have really important ecosystemic services. You probably know Seoul in South Korea. They dismantled a highway that was 10 lanes long, and it had 4 lanes on top, expressway, and to restore a stream underneath, and created this blue corridor and green corridor, 3.6 miles long, a continuous space for wildlife and people to walk, and bicycles that not only lowers temperatures, they've measured that it goes up to 5.9 degrees Celsius, that it lowers temperatures in that area, but also it protects the city from flooding, and of course, it attracts thousands of visitors every day, has created a lot of jobs, and has supported business development more than any other part of Seoul. Paris is using the water of the Seine to give free cooling to buildings around the river. And finally, I'll finish with Melbourne in Australia, because they have created an incredible strategy that's called Nature in the City strategy, where they think, they've analyzed and think how to bring together all of the levels of the ecosystem, from the soil and the fungi underneath to the plants and the animals and the birds and the insects and the frogs, and put into place all these actions that will ensure that the urban environment that their kids will grow up will be richer and much healthier. So, what keeps me really excited about this work, working to help cities cool down and work against climate change, is also that I feel that I'm really helping create much more wonderful cities to live in. So just think about this. Cranking up the air conditioning is just not going to cut it. Thank you.
A Acabamos de conferir Ellen Miroville falando sobre o aquecimento global. Quais são as soluções que a gente pode ter aí, soluções criativas que fazem do nosso planeta um lugar mais sustentável. E agora vamos ao nosso penúltimo talk, não menos importante. Vamos receber aqui o ex-vice-presidente dos Estados Unidos, que também é ambientalista, Al Gore, no TEDxFAAPLive 2022. Roda aí.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Al. Thank you so much for being here. Well, so just as I mentioned, you gave a rousing talk at Climate Countdown last fall about all of the things that we need to do to transform transform climate change and to turn things around here. What would you say is the state of play with climate action now 6 months later?
Well, thanks in part to many of the people that are part of the TED community, we've seen tremendous progress in the development of affordable, cheap solar electricity, wind electricity, electric vehicles, batteries, regenerative agriculture, green hydrogen is coming along, sustainable forestry. But unfortunately, the crisis is getting much worse, much faster than predicted, and it is getting worse at a rate faster than the rate at which we're deploying these solutions. We have everything we need, save sufficient political will. It's been that way for a while. And just since the Glasgow conference, we have seen a lot of backsliding. And we've seen financial institutions, banks and large investors pumping more and more and more money into more and more fossil fuels. It is quite literally insane. Today, we will put another 162 million tons into the thin shell of atmosphere surrounding the planet. And the accumulated amount now traps as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every 24 hours. Just, 95 miles northeast of here, in Lytton, British Columbia, it reached 121.3 degrees less than a year ago, 49.6 Celsius. More than 80 all-time high temperature records were broken here in British Columbia just in less than a year ago. And one day later, by the way, the entire town burned up. Yesterday, massive death in the Philippines from another superstorm fueled by the climate crisis. Chile just yesterday declared a drought emergency. But we are seeing the development of the solutions. Unfortunately, the financial interests, the fossil fuel companies, have captured the policymaking process in key countries and have intentionally zombified as many people as they can around the world with false messaging that they knew was false. They knew it, it's been proven to a fairly well. And as a consequence, our political decision-making process in key countries is locked, paralyzed. So the political will necessary to break through this has to be expressed in a much more effective way. We are nearing a political event horizon. And in the United States, J.P. Morgan Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, others, Bank of America, Royal Bank of Canada here, several banks in Canada joined the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and then last year they doubled the amount of money pumped into the tar sands, which is the dirtiest form of fossil fuels. When junkies can't use the veins in their arms and legs anymore, they shoot between their toes. That's what the tar sands is like. So I want to say that this is a moment when we have to rise to this occasion. Abraham Lincoln said the occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we have to rise with the occasion. As our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. We have to find ways to solve the democracy crisis in order to solve the climate crisis.
Wow. Well, you know, I think with the war in Ukraine, we're now seeing the question of energy security being brought center stage. And I'm curious what you think that will do in terms of accelerating or decelerating the transition, the energy transition.
Yeah, well, this should be a moment of global epiphany. This is a fossil fuel war, as many have said. And the timidity of some European countries, understandably because they are so dependent on Russian gas and oil, is another consequence of our dependence. And then we see this horrible scene where the United States goes begging other petrostates like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and Iran to pump up more and more fossil fuels. We should see this as a threat to national security and global security. It is a threat to disadvantaged communities. I mean, the co-pollution from burning fossil fuels kills 9 million people every year. A large multiple of the number of people killed by COVID are killed annually by the particulate pollution that comes from fossil fuels. We can save money. We can fight inflation, by the way. The sustainability revolution, including renewable energy, is massively deflationary. The cost continues to go down. There are multiple reasons why we should see this as a moment of decision to make a big change and get off of fossil fuels. We can't keep pumping more and more money in pursuit of short-term profit in activities that are destroying the future of humanity. This is not a time for moral cowardice. This is not a time for surrender and reckless indifference to the fate of humanity.
Well, I mean, I think in thinking about this being a time for change, the IPCC recently put out a report where they said that if we do want to make come around the bend, that we have until 2025 to see CO2 levels peak. I mean, that's just 3 years from now. How realistic do you think that actually is?
Well, actually, what they said, it needs to peak between 2020 and no later than 2025. Yes. First, let me share some good news from that dire IPCC report. They also said, if we reach net zero, true net zero, then the temperatures on our planet will stop going up with a lag of as little as 3 to 5 years. And if we stay at net zero, half of the CO2 in the atmosphere will fall out of the atmosphere in as little as 25 to 30 years. We have the technologies, we have the solutions, we have the ability to stop this progressive destruction of the future of humanity and start the long healing process. But we have to break through the capture of our political systems. They say boycotts don't work. Should we boycott all of these banks and all of these financial institutions? You know, scientists, climate scientists, some of them announced last week and started doing this, gluing themselves to the doors, to the gates of these fossil fuels facilities. If climate scientists have reached the conclusion that more facts and more data and more research is of absolutely no good unless we, the people, can find the means to break through the imprisonment of our self-determination on the part of large, massive polluters who are just looking at profits, then the scientists say they have to go into the streets. So I'm sorry to get all hot and charged up about this.
I think everyone appreciates it.
But yes, what the IPCC report, I mean, you know, it's an asymptotic curve that gets closer and closer to absolute panic, okay? And all the reports are very similar. This is real. You know, Voltaire once said, if you can convince people of absurdities, you can convince them to commit atrocities. We are seeing that in Ukraine today. We are seeing that on a global basis with this reckless indifference to the future of humanity. What will we say to the next generations when they look back and see you had the chance to do this? We have the means. The International Energy Agency says that in order to cut emissions by 50% in 2030, we have all of the technologies we need, fully developed, with deployment plans that have been proven to work. For the next 50% between 2030 and 2050, all of the technologies are in various stages of development. They can be ready. If we decide to develop them quickly enough, they will be ready. We have to stop destroying our future. It sounds so simple, but we have to break through this paralysis.
Well, we have to break through this paralysis. Ladies and gentlemen, Al Gore.
I have one other thing to say,
sure.
And I've said this before. Do not give up hope. And remember always that political will is itself a renewable resource. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Al.
E chegamos à nossa última palestra, nosso último TED Talks da tarde de hoje. Quero saber se vocês gostaram do nosso evento até o momento. Foi uma honra passar essa tarde aqui com vocês. E logo depois do Al Gore, nós vamos receber aqui no TEDxFAAPLive 2022 com o tema da nova era, ninguém mais, ninguém menos do que Gary Kasparov. Ele que é grão-mestre, analista e ficou mundialmente conhecido por ser o nosso gambito da rainha, o melhor jogador de xadrez do mundo. E ele tem muito para ensinar pra gente a respeito da guerra, inclusive. Roda aí.
Five years ago, I was on this stage to talk about the relationships between humans and machines. Today, I'm here to talk only about the relationships between humans. I regularly say in my lectures on artificial intelligence that humans will always have a monopoly on evil. It's not a threat, just a reminder that people choose. We're not algorithms. We're not bound by code or commandments or laws or treaties. We have them, but we choose. So let us talk now about the choices we make, about things in black and white, about Russia's war on Ukraine, and about good and evil. My life experience prepared me to identify evil at an early age. Not my life as the chess player, not even as the youngest world champion in history. No, my relevant experience is where I was born and raised, in what Ronald Reagan accurately called the evil empire, the USSR. As a young star in the chess-crazed Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s, I had many privileges my competitors did not. I could travel to the West, outside of the Iron Curtain, where it was obvious to me very quickly that they were the free world and we were not, despite what communist propaganda told us. I eventually got into trouble for sharing these views, what late American civil rights hero and Congressman John Lewis would have called good trouble. My criticism of the Soviet system and my praise for America was bad enough. But what was even worse, because where it was published. My comments were almost as of a scandal as Soviet movie star Natalia Negora's nude photos in Playboy in the same year. I felt I had to speak out, to use my fame, to push the envelope of free speech in Gorbachev's collapsing empire. The next year, in October 1990, in my World Championship match against Anatoly Karpov in New York City, I refused to play under Soviet hammer and sickle and demanded to play under Russian flag. The USSR staggered on for another year until it disintegrated on Christmas Day, 1991. Ah, what a great moment in world history. How we celebrated. The evil empire had fallen and the future looked bright. And yet, 8 years later, on December 31st, 1999, a former lieutenant colonel of KGB became the president of Russia. His name was Vladimir Putin. How this happened is a long, painful story. And in fact, I wrote a book about it in 2015 called Winter is Coming. Not an original title, I have to admit. But I'm a fan of Game of Thrones. And also, I felt it was appropriate because it was a warning. The subtitle was more important. Why Vladimir Putin and the enemies of the free world must be stopped. The publisher, by the way, didn't like it. Enemies, it's too harsh, sounded like Cold War. Absolutely, I said, Cold War, because winter is coming. Yeah, well, here we are, 7 years later. And if I wrote a sequel, it would be called Winter is Here. And the subtitle would be, I bleeping told you so. Actually, my first article warning was published in the Wall Street Journal on January 4, 2001. I saw evil because I heard evil. Putin was telling us what he was. All we had to do was listen. When Putin said that there was no such thing as a former KGB agent, I knew Russia's fragile democracy was in danger. When Putin said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, I knew Russia's newly independent neighbors were at risk. And when Putin talked at Munich Security Conference in 2007 about a return to spheres of influence, I knew he was ready to launch his plan. It was the language from Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact 1939, the language Hitler and Stalin used to divide Europe. And a year later, in 2008, Putin invaded the Republic of Georgia, 2014, Ukraine. It's a paradox, isn't it? Dictators lie about everything they have done, but often they tell us exactly what they're going to do. Just listen. Anyone who is surprised at Putin's war crimes in Ukraine must not be aware about his long record, beginning with the Second Chechen War in Grozny more than 2 decades ago. Vladimir Putin has been a war criminal from the start. So in 2005, still being ranked number 1, I retired from professional chess to form a pro-democracy, anti-Putin movement in Russia. As you could see, it didn't go so well. But it was not about winning or losing. I knew it was my moral duty, in keeping with the slogan of Soviet dissidents, do what you must and so be it. My friends and critics both kept telling me, Gary, you are a chess player, you are not a politician. This is not chess. You see everything in black and white. Politics are gray. You have to compromise. Really. Those who peacefully marched with me for free Russia are either in exile like me, or in jail like Alexei Navalny, or even murdered like Boris Nemtsov. Compromise? Not black and white? Are you sure? Compromise with this? You cannot look at the images from Ukraine in recent weeks and say there is no pure evil. Mariupol destroyed, Bucha slaughtered, Kramatorsk train station massacred, and worse is yet to come. And these horrors are not from Poland in 1945, not from Rwanda in 1994, not Aleppo 2016. This is Europe this week. How could this happen? How did we forget what evil can do? We have lost the generation that saw World War II firsthand. Otherwise, we reserve absolute evil for fiction. In fables, they believe in true evil. Good is harder to define. There is no pure good. If anyone says they know what pure good is, it's probably evil. In fantasy tale of hobbits and elves and dwarves, there was an idea that good comes in different forms and shapes, often in conflict, but they had to be united when facing absolute evil. Good will disagree. Evil says, no more disagreements, ever. That was life in real murder, the Soviet Union. That's what Putin wants for Russia and the world. We celebrated the end of the Cold War, but for too long. We forgot that evil doesn't die. It can be buried for a while under the rubble of Berlin Wall, but it grows back through the cracks of our apathy. We called it diplomacy when Putin was embraced by the leaders of the free world as equal despite his crimes. We called it engagement when we bought trillions of dollars in Russian oil and gas, money that built Putin's police state and his war machine. Let us call these things what they are. It was appeasement, it was collaboration. These days, we prefer to focus on domestic issues. We argue about the past, we fantasize about the future, while ignoring the present. Once the move is made, you cannot change it. Acknowledge the wrongdoings of the past, but do not pretend it can be fixed. It's the present that must be fixed. The heroes of the past were far from perfect, but the world we live in is better because of them. We too cannot be perfect, but we must always try to be better. As a chess player, I know that strategy is the future impact of present decisions. However grand our plans are for 2, 5, even 10 moves ahead, it's the move that we make now that determines that future. Ukraine is now on the front line of the war, global war of freedom against tyranny. The war the free world didn't want to admit existed. It cannot be ignored any longer. Brave Ukrainians are fighting like hell and dying right now to remind us not to take liberty for granted. Putin, like every dictator before him, underestimated the free will of free people. They deserve every weapon, every resource to win this war, because they're fighting for us, not only for the whole and free Ukraine. Everyone who told me a decade ago I was wrong now is telling I'm right, unfortunately. But we're still repeating the same mistakes of thinking that we can muddle through without taking risks, without taking a stand. The price of stopping a dictator always goes up with every delay, every hesitation. Meeting evil halfway it's still a victory for evil. Evil tempts us with our weakness, with our desire for comfort, being comfortable, cautious, rational, civilized. What kind of civilization we are fighting for if we allow war crimes and genocide again? What kind of world are we living for our children and grandchildren if we only talk of the past and the future while ignoring murder and misery in the present? This is not chess. This is not a battle between opposite colors, but of opposite values. Freedom, life, and love versus tyranny, death, and hatred. This is not chess. But sometimes things are black and white. Sometimes you have to fight for what you believe, or you lose it. This is not chess. There are no draws, no compromises in our battle with true evil. It's win or lose. And so we must fight. And so we must win. Slava Ukraini! Glory to Ukraine! Glory to freedom! Thank you.
E chegamos ao final da nossa transmissão, TEDxFAAPLive, com o tema Nova Era. E aí, o que vocês acharam? Espero que vocês tenham gostado de todos os participantes que passaram aqui nessa edição especial com curadoria do professor Vitor Greenberg. Eu gostaria de fazer um agradecimento a toda a nossa equipe técnica da Rádio TV FAAP Corporativa, Léo Fernandes, Ari, Ronaldo, toda a equipe maravilhosa, Chiquinho do áudio aqui no nosso microfone maravilhoso, Dema na iluminação. Obrigada, gente. Foi uma honra estar aqui nessa tarde de hoje, levando o TEDx para vocês. E se você quer um pouquinho mais, a gente tem um presente muito especial para compartilhar com vocês. Na semana que vem, no dia 10 de maio, nós temos mais uma edição do TEDxFAAP, que vai acontecer direto do Teatro FAAP, ao vivo e com plateia pela primeira vez. Que delícia! Desde 2019. Se você quiser saber um pouco mais sobre essa edição, fiquem atentos às nossas redes sociais, no @nafaap, que nós vamos publicar aí. Se você quiser fazer parte da plateia, também existe essa possibilidade. E eu vou dar aqui alguns pequenos spoilers. O tema do TEDxFAAP 2022, que acontece ao vivo na semana que vem, é empreendedorismo sustentável. Convidados incríveis, de maneira presencial, aqui na FAAP na semana que vem. Eu espero você, direto do Teatro FAAP. Muito obrigada por essa segunda-feira maravilhosa e até semana que vem. Tchau!